In today's show, we're jumping into the second video of our 3-video series on how to adjust and control color inside of Lightroom Classic. Hey everyone, welcome into Magnolia Photography SC. I'm Jeff House. I'm a wildlife photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. So today we're going to be talking about another tool that allows us to adjust and control color inside of Lightroom, and that is the calibration panel. Now, for some reason, this panel, this tool, tends to be one of the most feared tools inside of Lightroom, even by professional photographers. I know a lot of professional photographers who even avoid this tool altogether, and that's just insane and that's ridiculous, and we're not going to do that. We're not going to give up using a tool that is powerful and allows us to bring our photos to the next level and really give us that polished professional look. This tool is so helpful in boosting colors, in giving us stylistic color profiles that we can really kind of hone in to form our own style when it comes to editing. And that type of stuff is a little bit further down the line. As wildlife photographers, we're probably most interested in boosting our colors in a way that really helps our photo, right? We learned in the last lesson that using tools like saturation can often affect our photos adversely because it can really make the colors look ugly once they cross that line of becoming oversaturated. The calibration tool is going to be very helpful for us in our photo editing process. Now, I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball. First video, we talked about HSL in the point color tool, but truth be told, when we come in and we're adjusting color, the calibration tool is going to be the first tool that we go to do this. And I know what you're thinking. You're going to ask me, then why in the hell did we do the color mixer on the first video? Well, the color mixer, the HSL panel, the point color tool, all those things that we talked about in that first video, they're much easier to understand, and they give us a better vision, a better understanding of how we can manipulate color inside of Lightroom Classic. So I wanted to do that first to kind of give us that foundation of how we manipulate color, and then we can jump into these a little bit more of a difficult concept to understand. But I promise we're going to work hard and do our best to simplify this and demystify it and make it more clear from you. Let's first jump into Lightroom because I want you to understand where you can find this tool. Now, chances are you've never changed the order of the panels inside Lightroom. Chances are you didn't know you could, but that is going to be one little tip that we give you in this video. So as you can see, each panel has a little white triangle on the right side of it. Of course, we can click that to close the panel or open the panel. The calibration panel is second for me, but for you, it's probably way down here at the bottom. So check your Lightroom, and that's where you will generally find this panel. What you can do, though, is what I did. If you just click on any one of these dark gray panels, right-click it, you'll get a screen that pops open where it allows us to customize our develop panel. We're going to click on that. Once we come into this, we can click on the hamburger here and then drag and drop your tool wherever you want it. Now, what I would recommend is setting up the first 4 tools the way I have it. It's the basic tool, the calibration tool, the color mixer, and the color grading panels. From there, you can have them in any order that you prefer. And this will probably change over time, so don't worry about it. Nothing is set in stone here. As you develop your editing style and your workflow, you'll probably make some tweaks to the order of these tools. Once you're done, you will hit save. Keep in mind that the order of your panel will not change until you save it and then restart Lightroom. And you will get a prompt telling you this, but I just want to reinforce it. So once you have a moment, go ahead, figure out how you want to arrange your panel, save it, restart Lightroom, and your changes will take effect. Let's jump in to get a good understanding here of the calibration tools as they relate also to the color mixer tools, because these two panels, these two tools do work in conjunction with each other, and they give us a lot of flexibility when it comes to manipulating our colors, but we don't want to be guessing what we're doing. Yes, you don't really need to know the whole theory behind the calibration tool, right? You can go in and change the sliders, and if you like what you did, keep it. And if you don't, reset it or undo it. You don't, you're not going to ruin your photos. You're not going to break anything. You can just undo something that you did that perhaps you don't like. But it's good to understand how to use the tool, because then you can, one, you can edit your photos with a purpose and with intent. And two, you can understand how you get to a certain look, or you understand why you're doing what you're doing. You're not just going to get lucky and have something come out good and not know how to repeat that. That's why we want to know how it works. All right, let's understand something about these two tools. If we look at the calibration tool, you're going to see that we have, I wouldn't really worry about the tint slider. I never use this. In fact, I use it up here in the basic panel if I'm going to use it anywhere. This is simply a tool that can help us. If our photo has a slightly more magenta tint, we can reduce the magenta. If it has a slightly more green tint, we can increase the magenta, and we can kind of even out any tint that we have going on. That's it in a high level view. There's some other ways we can use this tool in our skies to help kind of enhance the colors and stuff like that. But for now, just kind of understand it as removing an unwanted color cast in our photos. So if we go down to the calibration tool, we're going to see that there are basically three different sliders, right? We have the red primary, the green, and the blue primaries, and they each come with a slider where we can adjust the hue and the saturation. Well, why is it red, green, and blue? Well, you're probably familiar with this, right? Even if we go back to the days of elementary school and our good old art class, red, green, and blue are the primary colors. And when we mix the primary colors, that's how we get additional colors. We're simplifying this. That is it in a nutshell. Red, green, and blue are the primary colors that form the basis for all other colors that follow. So that is why the calibration tool is based on that. And the reason it's based on that is because that's how our cameras capture an image. Think about this. I don't care what size camera you have, whether it's full frame or a crop sensor. I don't care if your camera is a 50 megapixel camera or a 12 megapixel camera. You have a sensor in your camera. That sensor is made up of tiny little pixels. However many it may be, we don't care. What we want to pull from this is that when your camera takes a picture, each of those pixels is recording light. What light rays do you think it's recording? That's right, you got it. Recording red, green, and blue, right? It's recording those three channels. And those three channels form the color that we see in our photo based on how much of each of those three channels it's gathering. So let's just kind of reiterate that a little bit so that it sinks in. This can be a little confusing. So each pixel, again, at the time your camera is taking a photo, every pixel is going to record a certain amount of red light, a certain amount of green light, and a certain amount of blue light. And based on how those percentages play out, that's going to determine what color we get in that pixel. Okay, and that's how we get the overall color in our photos. So what happens with the calibration tool is as we make adjustments, these are global adjustments because there are red, green, and blue channels in every single pixel. Well, how does that differ from the color mixer that we talked about in the last video? Well, the color mixer is not going to drill down nearly as deep, right? We learned that we're going to stick with saturation, right? Because that's what we're dealing with up here in the calibration tool. Let's take a look at what happens when we change the primary colors in the color mixer. If we change the red in the color mixer, what do we think is going to happen if we change that saturation level? Is anything in the photo going to change? And I'm sure you're all going, yeah, the red bird's going to change. And of course, you would be right. If we take saturation out, the bird gets very muted. If we go to the right and add saturation, the bird gets super red. But what happens if we go to the next primary color, green? Is anything going to happen with the bird if I move this slider? If I go to the left, nothing happened. If I go to the right, nothing happened. Well, that makes sense, right? We have a red bird. We don't have a green bird. Okay, we're good, right? We're all on the same page right now. I know this probably seems like I'm being a little moronic, but you're going to see where we're going. And I guess you're probably already figuring where we're going. Let's go to the last primary color, blue. If I move this slider, is the bird going to change? Nope. Why? We have a red bird. We don't have a blue bird. That is how HSL sees our photo. It doesn't care how much red, blue, or green was captured in each pixel when the camera took the picture. All it cares about are the final colors that were created from the light that was captured. So HSL only sees red in that bird. It doesn't see the blue or green that was captured in the pixels. Only sees red. But when we go up to the calibration tool, like I said, I'm sure you can guess what's going to happen here. And you're right. As we move the saturation with each of these sliders, we're going to see changes to the image. And this is where it gets confusing for people because it's hard to understand why the saturation is changing in calibration, but it's not changing in HSL. Because the calibration, unlike HSL, doesn't really care about the final colors that we're looking at. It cares about the colors it gathered as it was taking the picture. Again, each pixel is capturing a certain amount of red, a certain amount of green, and a certain amount of blue. Those colors together create a color. Now, how we can see this, if we look at the histogram up here in the right-hand corner, if our cursor is not on the image itself, it's not on the photo, it's going to give us information about our settings at the time of image capture. Aperture, shutter speed, focal length, ISO setting. But when we move our cursor onto our photo, wherever we let our cursor sit, it's going to tell us what the values of the red, green, and blue channels are in that pixel we're hovering over. So if I move this over to the bird and just place it anywhere here on the red, you can see that we now have values on the red, green, and blue channel. I'm going to write these down while we do this example. So we know right now that 63.5% red, 33.2% green, and 17.2% blue is going to give us that exact color red that our cursor is over right now. What if I move the cursor a little bit to the left? The color looks the same, does it not? Will the values of the red, green, and blue channels remain the same though? And of course, they will not. So if we move this to the left, I think it's pretty fair to say the color to our eye looks exactly the same. At least it does to me. Well, let's take a look at our new values. The current red value now has gone down to 63. The blue value stayed the same. And the green value stayed the same at 33.2. What about the blue value? Stayed pretty close, 17.1. So we know the color is very close, but there are some differences, right? There was a shift in the amount of red, green, and blue captured at the time the picture was taken. What if we were to go down here a little further, down to the bottom left? Well, now the red has dropped down to 47. Okay, now keep in mind, we were at 63 a second ago. The green is now dropped down to 22, and it was at 33. And the blue has dropped down to 9.5, and that was at 17. Now, I think we can agree that the red is a different color than the red we were clicked on a second ago. It seems to be a little bit darker. So we are going to see different values, but this is just important to understand because this is what the calibration tool is manipulating. It's manipulating these values we see in the red, green, and blue channels. So that is the difference between the calibration tool and the color mixer tool with the HSL sliders. It's all what it sees, right? So the calibration tool sees the light rays that were collected at the time of image capture, and the HSL only sees the colors that are derived from the combination of those red, green, and blue channels. So this is what the calibration tool is doing. Now, what is really helpful is that we can use these tools to get a little bit more color boost. And that is what I was talking about towards the beginning of the show. So all we have to do is go in here and move these sliders to see what it does to our red color. What I typically recommend is when you are looking at your prominent color, in this case, it's red, I usually recommend starting with the other two colors first. So in this case, we would start with the green and blue because the adjustment will tend to be a little bit more subtle because we're not doing red on red, right? We're using the green channel and whatever red is within that green channel to be manipulated. So as we move the green, if we go to the left, we can see it reduces the saturation of the bird, right? It's not as much as the red channel does. The red channel goes way down. But if we use this green channel, we can kind of bump up the greens a little bit. Maybe we want to bring them down just a little bit. But here's the thing that I want to point out to you. There are greens in the photo, right? The greens are in the background here. So if we go up, we can see the green goes way up, but so does the red. What if we want to bring the red down? Because we just tend to like that shade of the red a little better. Well, if we're taking saturation out of the green channel, what does that mean for the green in the background? We're reducing the green in the background. But by reducing the green, we like this red tone a lot better. So we're controlling the red tone through that green. And we're also going to maybe take a look at the blue tone. And we'll go maybe just a little higher on the blue tone. All right. So we got to the red that we really like for our color, right? And we can click on the eye. This is where we started. This is where we are. You can see this is subtle, but there's a little color boost there. And I don't know if you can pick that up through the video, but there's a little color boost going on by the changes that we made. It's subtle. But what about the green that we kind of muted out here a little bit? Well, now we can go down to the color mixer and now we can start playing with the green sliders because we know we're not going to change anything about the bird by moving the green sliders because we don't have a green bird. We have a red bird. All right, so let's take a look at the green sliders. We're going to start first by changing the hue to see what we got here. And I'm going to bump up the hue and make those greens a little bit more green because we lost some of that green. And then I'm going to look at the saturation slider and figure out where I want that to be. And I like that. That looks pretty good right there. And then lastly, we're going to look at that luminance slider where we can change how dark or light our green is. So I'm going to go to the left and right, and I'm going to go down to the left because I want to make it a little bit darker because I feel like it brings out some richness in that green. And there we have it. So this is how we can use the calibration slider. Let's take a look at a color wheel to get a little better understanding of how this looks as well. So if we pull up a picture of a color wheel here, let's stick with the HSL slider first. And again, we're going to stick with the saturation. If we move the red slider, what is going to happen here? If we add saturation or we take saturation out, you can see that the only colors being affected are those colors that have a red hue to it, right? So it's the red, the orange, this orange, and maybe a little bit over there too. Those colors are the ones being affected. And these colors aren't really being affected that much at all. Predominantly, it's these two colors that have the more reddish tones and the most impact by what we're doing. So we can see that happening. And it slowly leaks out here, but you really can barely pick it up. So that's what's happening here with the red slider in the HSL, because again, HSL is only seeing the final color created by the red, green, and blue channels. But if we go up here back to the calibration panel and we take a look at the saturation of the red and we change that, look how many more colors are being impacted by this slider. Every color in the color wheel is being impacted. Why? Because red, green, and blue are the primary colors that are found in every color we have. So to some extent, those colors are all going to be impacted. Some may be less than others, but they're all going to be impacted. So this is why we have to be aware of when we make changes with the calibration tool, we are manipulating colors globally. So we just want to proceed with a little caution, because we may add a little color here, take away a little color over here, and it's a little bit of a push and pull effect as we go through and use this tool to edit our colors. But as I showed you just a second ago with the greens in that bird with the cardinal, we can use the HSL to fine tune our colors. If we want to add a little bit more color, we can do that. Maybe we increased one color a little too much with the changes we made in the calibration tools, and we can go down to HSL to bring that back down a little bit, soften that color so it's maybe not quite so bright or maybe not quite so oversaturated. So this is kind of what we're doing. We're massaging the photo with these two tools to get the most color from our images. Hopefully this makes a lot of sense to you. I want to touch on a couple other things. You're probably going to hear when we talk about cameras, I was just mentioning, right? Every camera has a sensor. I don't care how big the sensor is. I don't care how many megapixel is. And guess what? I don't care what manufacturer we're talking about. Now, if you've been around photography for any length of time, I would almost guarantee that you've heard on YouTube or any other places where you're around photographers, people will talk about Nikon and Canon and Sony, and they will hear comments about their color science. And you'll commonly hear people say, oh, you know, Sony has a horrible color science. It sucks. You know, their pictures look awful. And then you're going to hear people say, Canon has a great color science. They just have such great colors that come out of their camera. Well, you know what? Every camera sees color a little bit differently because every company interprets color differently. But it's what they believe to be the best color. Let me explain that quickly. So if we look at this picture, this is not the accurate reds that Canon, Nikon, and Sony use. This is just for demonstration purposes only. But when each of these manufacturers are making their color science in their cameras, to Canon, this red may be what they consider to be the ideal red, and that's what they use in their color science. And they do this with all of the colors. Nikon may say, well, this is what we believe to be the correct color red, and this is what's in our color science. And then Sony will say the same thing. This is what we think is the correct color red, and this is what we use. So now you can use any of these camera manufacturers, okay? And people will tell you, oh, I'd never buy a Sony because their color science sucks. I'll only shoot Nikon, or I'll only shoot Canon. These are commonly what we refer to as fanboys. It's nice that you have, you know, such regard for your camera manufacturer, but when it gets to the point that you think that the sun rises and sets with everything they do, then you're a little bit misled. Because the truth of the matter is, we can take any color science coming out of any camera, right? So we could take 3 of the exact same picture taken by a Canon camera, a Nikon camera, and a Sony camera. And when we're done editing it and tweaking the colors, you will not know which camera took which picture. You will never know what their color science was and where the colors ended up. The point here is don't avoid buying a camera because of these crazy comments about color science. Color science is just how each manufacturer interprets color, but you can tweak the colors to any tone, any hue, any saturation, any luminance that you want. And we're seeing how to do that right here inside of Lightroom Classic. All right, guys, that is where we are going to end today's video on the calibration tool. I hope you have a much better understanding now of how this tool works. Just remember, it is seeing color at the time of image capture in the 3 primary channels, red, green, and blue. And it will manipulate those pixels and those channels as we make the changes. The HSL sliders are just seeing the final colors as we see them on the screen. And any changes that we make will only affect the colors that we see. I hope this makes it easier for you. I hope you found this video helpful. If you liked it, please consider subscribing to the channel. Other than that, good luck, play around with this, and I hope your colors just look amazing in your next photos. Take care.